Hello. If you're having a tired and heavy heart, welcome to a quiet reading hour. I'm going to read to you while you hold yourself a little tighter. If you're having a comforting beverage, let me know what you're having. I'm just having water. Hello. Okay, I'm going to start. I lit a pipe and had a good long smoke and went on watching. The ferry boat was floating with the current, and I allowed her to have a chance to see who was aboard when she came along, because she would come in close, where the bread did. When she got pretty well along down towards me, I put out my pipe and went to where I fished out the bread, and lay down behind a log, on the bank, in a little open place where the log forked I could peep through. Okay. By and by she came along, and she that they could run out a plank and walk to shore. Most everybody was on the boat. Bob and Judge Thatcher and Bessie Thatcher and Joe Harper and Tom Sawyer and his old Aunt Polly and Sid and Mary and plenty more. Everybody was talking about the murder, and the captain broke in and says, "Look sharp now. The current sets in closest here, and maybe he's washed ashore and got tangled amongst the brush at the water's edge. I hope so anyway." I didn't hope so. They all crowded up and leaned over the rails nearly in my face, and kept still, watching with all their might. I could see them first rate, but they couldn't see me. Then the captain sung out, "Stand away!" and the cannon let off such a blast right before me that it made me deaf with the noise and pretty near blind with the smoke, and I judged I was gone. If they'd had some bullets in, I reckon they'd got a corpse they was after. Well, I see I weren't hurt, thanks to goodness. The boat floated on and went out of sight around the shoulder of the island. I could hear the boom now and then, further and further off, and by, after an hour, I didn't hear it no more. The island was 3 mile long. I judged they had got to the foot and was giving up, but they didn't yet awhile. They turned around the foot of the island and started up the channel on the Missouri side under steam, and booming once in a while as they went. I crossed over to that side and watched them. When they got abreast the head of the island, they quit shooting and dropped over to the Missouri shore and went home to town. I knowed I was all right now. Nobody else would come a hunting after me. I got my traps out of the canoe and made me a nice camp in the thick woods. I made a kind of tent out of my blankets to put my things under so the rain couldn't get at them. I catched a catfish and haggled him open with my saw, and towards sundown I started my campfire and had supper. Then I set out a line to catch some fish for breakfast. When it was dark, I set my camp fire smoking, and feeling pretty well satisfied. But by and by it got sort of lonesome, and so I went and sat on the bank and listened to the current washing along, and counted the stars and drift logs and rafts that came down, and then went to bed. There ain't no better way to put in time when you're lonesome. You can't stay so. You soon get over it. And so for 3 days and nights, no difference, just the same thing. But the next day I went exploring around down through the island. I was boss of it. It all belonged to me, so to say, and I wanted to know all about it. But mainly, I wanted to put in the time. I found plenty of strawberries, ripe and prime, and green summer grapes, and green raspberries, and the green blackberries was just beginning to show. They would all come handy by and by, I judged. Well, I went fooling along in the deep woods until I judged I weren't far from the foot of the island. I had my gun along, but I hadn't shot nothing. It was for protection. Thought I would kill some game nigh home. About this time I mighty near stepped on a good-sized snake, and it went sliding off through the grass and flowers, and I after it, trying to get a shot at it. I clipped along, and all of a sudden I bounded right on the ashes of a campfire that was still smoking. My heart jumped up amongst my lungs. I never waited for to look further, but uncocked my gun and went sneaking back on my tiptoes as fast as I ever could. Every now and then I stopped a second amongst the thick leaves and listened, but my breath came so hard I couldn't hear nothing else. I slunk around another piece of further and then listened again, and so on and so on. If I see a stump, I look at it for a man. If I trod on a stick and broke it, it made me feel like a person had cut one of my breaths in two and only got half, and the short half too. When I got to camp, I weren't feeling very brash. There weren't much sand in my craw, but I says, this ain't no time to be fooling around. So I got all my traps into my canoe again, and as to have them out of sight, and I put out the fire and scattered the ashes around to look like an old last year's camp, and then climb a tree. I reckon I was up in the tree 2 hours, but I didn't see nothing. I didn't hear nothing. I only thought I heard and seen as much as 1,000 things. Well, I couldn't stay up there forever, so at last I got down, but I kept in the thick woods and on the lookout all the time. All I could get to eat was berries and what was left from the breakfast. By the time it was night, I was pretty hungry, so when it was good and dark, I slid out from the shore before moonrise and paddled over to the Illinois bank, about a quarter of a mile. I went out in the woods and cooked supper, and I had about made up my mind I would stay there all night when I hear a plunkety plunk, and says to myself, horses coming, and next I hear people's voices. I got everything into the canoe as quick as I could, and then went creeping through the woods to see what I could find out. I hadn't got far when I hear a man say, we better camp here if we can find a good place. The horses is about beat out. Let's look around. I don't wait but shoved out and pulled away easy. I tied up in the old place and reckoned I would sleep in the canoe. I didn't sleep much. I couldn't somehow for thinking, and every time I waked up I thought somebody had me by the neck. So the sleep didn't come to me no good. By and by I says to myself, I can't live this way. I'm going to find out who it is that's here on the island with me. I'll find it out or bust. Well, I felt better right off. So I took my paddle and slid out from shore, just a step or two, and then let the canoe drop along down amongst the shadows. The moon was shining, and outside of the shadows, it made it most as light as day. I poked along well on I poked along well on to an hour, everything still as rocks and sound asleep. Well, by this time I was most down to foot and most down to the foot of the island. A little ripply cool breeze began to blow, and that was as good as saying the night was about done. I gave her a turn with the paddle and brung her nose to shore. Then I got my gun and slipped out and into the edge of the woods. I sat down there on a log and looked out through the leaves. I see the moon go off watch, and the darkness begin to blanket the river. But in a little while I see a pale streak over the tree tops, and know the day was coming. So I took off my gun and slipped off towards where I had run across that campfire, stopping every minute or two to listen, but I hadn't no luck somehow. I couldn't seem to find the place, and by, sure enough, I catched a glimpse of fire away through the trees. I went for it cautious and slow. By and by I was close enough to have a look, and there laid a man on the ground. It most gave me the fan tods. He had a blanket around his head, and his head was nearly in the fire. I sat there behind a clump of bushes in about 6 foot of him. I kept my eyes on him steady. It was getting grey daylight now. Pretty soon he gave he gasped and scratched himself and hove off the blanket, and it was Miss Watson's Jim. I bet I was glad to see him. I says, "Hello, Jim," and skipped out. He bounced up and stared at me wild. Then he drops down on his knees and puts his hands together and says, "Don't hurt me, don't. I hain't ever done no harm to no ghost. I always liked dead people. I done all I could for 'em. You go and get in the river again while you belongs, and don't do nothing to me, old Jim. Others, allers your friend." Well, I weren't long no making him understand I weren't dead. I was also I was ever so glad to see Jim. I weren't lonesome now. I told him I weren't afraid of him, telling the people where I was. I talked along, but he only sat there and looked at me, never said nothing. Then I says, "It's good daylight. Let's get breakfast. Make up your campfire good. Where's the user making up the campfire to cook strawberries in such truck? But you got a gun, ain't you? Then we can get something better than strawberries." "Strawberries and such truck," I says. "Is that what you live on?" "I couldn't get nothing else," he said. "Why, how long have you been on the island, Jim?" "I come here the night after you's killed." "What, all that time?" "Yes, indeedy." "And hain't you had nothing but kind of rubbish to eat?" "No, sir, nothing else." "Well, you must be most starved, ain't you?" "I reckon I could eat a horse." "I think I could. How long you been on the island?" "Since the night I got killed." "No, why? What was you lived on?" "But you got a gun." "Oh yes, you got a gun, that's good. Now you kill something and I'll make the fire." So we went over to where the canoe was, and while he built a fire in a grassy open place amongst the trees, I fetched meal and bacon and coffee pot and frying pan and sugar and tin cups, and the man was set back considerable because he reckoned it was all done with witchcraft. I catched a good big catfish too, and Jim cleaned him with his knife and fried him. When breakfast was ready we rolled on the grass and ate it smoking hot. Jim laid it in with all his might, for he was most about starved. Then, when he got pretty well stuffed, we laid off and lazied. By and by, Jim says, "But looky here, Huck, who was it that was killed on that shanty if I weren't you?" Then I told him the whole thing, and he said it was smart. He said Tom Sawyer couldn't get up no better plan than what I had. Then I says, "How do you come here, Jim? And how'd you get there?" He looked pretty uneasy and didn't say nothing for a minute. Then he says, "Maybe I better not tell." "Why, Jim?" "Well, there's reasons, but you wouldn't tell on me if I was to tell you, would you, Huck?" "Blamed if I would, Jim." "Well, I believe you, Huck. I I run off." "Jim!" "But mind you said you wouldn't tell. You know you said you wouldn't tell, Huck." "Well, I did. I said I wouldn't, and I'll stick to it. Honest Injun, I will. People would call me a low-down abolitionist and despite me for keeping mum, but that don't make no difference. I ain't a-going to tell, and I ain't a-going back there anyways. So now let's talk. Let's know all about it." "Well, you see, it is this way. Ol' Missus, that's Miss Watson, she picks on me all the time and treats me pooty rough, but she always said she wouldn't sell me down to Orleans. But I noticed there was a man trader round the place considerable lately, and I begin to get uneasy. Well, one night I creeps to the booty late, and he don't want quite shit, and I near old Missus tell the waiter she going to sell me down to Orleans, but she didn't want to, and she could get $800 for me, and it was such a big stack of money she couldn't resist. The waiter she tried to get her to say she wouldn't do it, but I never waited to hear the rest. I let out my mighty quick, I tell you. I tuck out and shin down the hill and space to steal a gifts along the shore, somers 'bove the town. But there was people a-stirring yet, and I hid in the old tumble-down cooper shop on the bank to wait for everybody to go away. Well, I was there all night. There was somebody round all the time. Long 'bout 6 in the morning skiffs began to go by, and 'bout 8 or 9 every skiff that went along was talking about how your pop came over to the town and say you's killed. There's the last skiffs was full o' ladies and gentlemen a-going over for to see the place. Sometimes they pull up on the shore and I rest before they started across, and by the talk I got to know all about the killing. I is powerful sorry you's killed Huck, but I ain't no more now. I lay there under the shavings all day. I was hungry and I weren't afraid because I knowed old Missus in the winter was going to start to the camp meeting right after breakfast and gonna all day, and they knows I goes off with the cattle 'bout daylight, so they wouldn't spect me out round the place, so they wouldn't miss me till after dark in the evening. The other servants wouldn't miss me, 'cause they'd shin out and take holiday soon as the folks was out of the way. Well, when it came dark I tuck out up the river and went 'bout 2 mile or more and watched they weren't no houses. I made up my mind about what's a-gwine do. You see, if I kept trying to get away afoot, the dogs would track me, and if I stole a skiff to cross over, they'd miss that skiff, you see, and they know about what I land on the other side, and where you pick up my track. So I says, a raft, that's for I order. I don't make no track. I see light coming round the bend by me. So I waded in and shoved a log ahead of me and swam more halfway across the river. Thank you. So I waded in, shoved along ahead of me, and swam more than halfway across the river, and got amongst the driftwood, and kept my head down low, and kinder swung again, and the current till the raft come along. Then I swam to the stern of it and took a hold. It clouded up and pretty dark for a little while, so I clomb up and lay down on the planks. The men was all way yonder in the middle, where the lantern was. The river was a risin' and there was a good current, so I reckoned that by 4 in the morning I'd be 25 mile down the river, and then I'd slip in just before daylight and swim ashore, and take to the woods on the Illinois side. But I didn't have no luck. When I was most down to the head of the island, a man began to come aft with a lantern. I see it warn't no use for to wait, so I slid overboard and struck out for the island. Well, I had a notion I'd land most anywheres, but I couldn't bank to bluff. I was most to the foot of the island before I found a good place. I went into the woods and judged I wouldn't fool no with no rafts no more, long as they moved the lantern round and so. I had my pipe in a plug, a dogler, and some matches and my cap, and they weren't wet, so I was all right. And so you ain't no meat nor bread to eat all this time. Why didn't you get mud tuckles? How you gonna get 'em? You can slip up on 'em and grab 'em, and how's their body gonna hit 'em with a rock? How could a body do it in the night? And I weren't gonna show myself on the bank in the daytime. Well, that's so. You've had to keep in the woods all the time, of course. Did you hear 'em shooting the cannon? Oh, yes, I knowed they was arter you. I see 'em go by here. Watched 'em, too. Watched 'em through the bushes. Some young birds came along, flying in, flying a yard or two at a time and lighting. Jim said it was a sign that it was going to rain. He said it was a sign when young chickens flew that way, and so he reckoned it was the same way when young birds done it. I was going to catch some of them, but Jim wouldn't let me. He said it was death. He said his father laid mighty sick once, and some of them catched a bird, and his old granny said his father would die, and he did. And Jim said you mustn't count on the things that are going to cook for dinner, because that would bring bad luck. The same if you cook the tablecloth after sundown, if you shook the tablecloth after sundown. And he said if a man owned a beehive and that man died, the bees must be told about it before sun up next morning, or else the bees would all weaken down and quit work and die. Jim said bees wouldn't sting idiots, but I didn't believe that, because I'd tried them lots of times myself, and they wouldn't sting me. I had heard about some of these things before, but not all of them. Jim knowed all kinds of signs. He said he knowed most everything. I said it looked to me like all the signs was about bad luck. So I asked him if they weren't any good luck signs. He says, mighty few, and they ain't no use to a body. What you want to know when good luck's a comin' for? Want to keep it off? He said, if you's got hairy arms and a hairy breast, it's a sign that you's are going to be rich. Well, there's some use in a sign like that, 'cause it's so far ahead. You see, maybe so might get discouraged and you didn't know by the sign that you're gonna be rich by me by. Have you got hairy arms and a hairy breast, Jim? What's the use to ask that question? Don't you see I has? Well, are you rich? No, but I ain't been rich once and gonna be rich again. Once once I had $14, but I took to speculating and got busted out. What did you speculate on, Jim? Well, I first tackled stock. What kind of stock? Why, livestock, cattle, you know. I put $10 on a cow, but I ain't gonna risk no more money in stock. The cow up and died on my hands. So you lost the $10. No, I didn't lose it all. I only lost about nine of it. I sold a hide and taller for $1.10. You had $5.10 left. Did you speculate any more? Yes. You know that one-legged man that belongs to old Mr. Brandish? Well, he got up a bank and said about anybody that put in $1 would get $4 more at the end of the year. Well, all the men went in, but they didn't have much. I was the only one that had much, so I stuck out for more than $4. And I said if I didn't get it, I'd start a bank myself. Well, of course, that man wanted to keep me out of the business because he says they weren't business enough for two banks, and he said I could put in my $5 and he may pay me 35 at the end of the year. So I done it. I reckon if I'd invest $35 right off and keep things a moving, there was a there was a man named Bob that had catched a wood flat and his master I didn't know it. And I bought it off of him and told him take the $35 and the end of the year come. But somebody stole the wood flat that night, and next day the one-legged man said the bank's busted, so they didn't none of us get no money. But what did you do with the 10 cents, Jim? Well, I was gonna spend it, but I had a dream, and the dream told me to give it to a man named Balloon. Balloons, as they called him for short. And he's one of them chuckleheads, you know. But he's lucky, they say. I see I weren't lucky. The dreams say I let Balloon invest the 10 cents and he'd make a raise for me. Well, Balloon, he took the money, and when he was in church, he heard the preacher say that whoever got the poe lend to the Lord and but get his money back 100 times. So Balloon he took and gave the 10 cents to the Poe, and laid low to see what was gonna come of it. Well, what did come of it, Jim? Nothing. Never come of it. I couldn't manage to collect that money no way. And Balloon he couldn't. I ain't gonna lend no more money. Doubt I see the security. Gonna get your money back 100 times, the preacher says. If I could get the 10 cents back, I'd call it square. But I'd be glad and be gladder the chance. Well, it's all right anyway, Jim. Long as you're going to be rich again sometime or other. Yes, and I's rich now. Come to look at it, I owns myself and I were $800, and I's worth $800. I wish I had the money. I wouldn't want no more. Yes. I wanted to go and look at a place right about the middle of the island that I found when I was exploring. So when we started and soon got to it because the island was only 3 miles long and a quarter of a mile wide. This place was tolerable long, steep hill or ridge about 40 foot high. We had a rough time getting to the top. The sides were so steep and the bushes so thick. We tramped and clumped around all over it, and by found up a good cavern in the rock, most up on the top, most up to the top on the side towards Illinois. The cavern was as big as 2 or 3 rooms bunched together, and Jim could stand up straight in it. It was cool in there. Jim was putting our traps in the right way, but I said we didn't want to be climbing up down there all the time. Jim said if we had a canoe hid in a good place had all traps in the cavern, we could rush there if anybody was to come to the island and they could never find us without dogs. And besides, he said, them little birds had said it was going to rain, and did I want the things to get wet? So we went back and got the canoe and paddled up abreast the cavern and lugged all the traps up there. Then we hunted up a place close by to hide the canoe in, almost the thick amongst the thick willows. We took some fish off the lines and set them again and began to get ready for dinner. The door of the cavern was big enough to roll the hogshead in, and on the side of the door the floor stuck out a little bit and was flat and good place to build a fire on, so we built it there and cooked dinner. We spread the blankets inside for a carpet and eat our dinner in there. We put all the other things handy at the back of the cavern. Pretty soon it darkened up and began to thunder and lighten. So the birds was right about it. Directly it began to rain, and it rained like all fury too, and I never see the wind blow so. I was one of these regular summer storms. It would get so dark that it looked all blue black outside and lovely, and the rain would thrash along by so thick that the trees off a little ways looked dim and spider-webby, and here would come a blast of wind that would bend the trees down and turn up the pale underside of the leaves, And then a perfect ripper of a gust would follow along and set the branches to tossing their arms as if they was just wild. And next, when it was just about the bluest and blackest, psst, and it was as bright as glory as you'd have a little glimpse of tree-tops plunging about away off yonder in the storm, hundreds of yards further than you could see before, dark as sin again in a second, and now you'd hear the thunder let go with an awful crash, and then go rumbling, grumbling, tumbling down the sky towards the underside. Towards the underside of the world like rolling empty barrels downstairs, where it's long stairs and they bounce a good deal, Jim, this is nice, I says. I wouldn't want to be nowhere else but here. Pass me along another hunk of fish and some hot cornbread. Well, you wouldn't have been here if it hadn't been for Jim. You'd have been down in the woods without any dinner and get most drowned too. That you would, honey. Chickens knows when it's gonna rain. So do the birds, child. The river went on rising for 10 or 12 days, till at last it was over the banks. The water was 3 or 4 foot deep on the island in the low places and on the Illinois bottom. On that side it was good many miles wide, but on the Missouri side it was the same old distance across, just half a mile, because the Missouri shore was just a wall of high bluffs. Daytimes we paddled all over the island in the canoe. It was mighty cool and shady in the deep woods, even if the sun was blazing outside. We went winding in and out amongst the trees, and sometimes the vines hung so thick we had to back away and go some other way. Well, on every old broken down tree you could see rabbits and snakes and such things, and when the island had been overflowed a day or two, they got so tame, on account of being hungry, that you could paddle right up and put your hand on them if you wanted to, but not the snakes and turtles, they would stay in the water. The ridge our cavern was in full of them. We could have pets enough if we wanted them. One night we catched a little section of a lumber raft, nice pine planks. It was 12 foot wide and about 15 or 16 foot long, and the top stood above the water 6 or 7 inches, a solid level floor. We could see saw logs go by in the daylight sometimes, but we let them go. We didn't show ourselves in the daylight. Another night when we was up at the head of the island just before daylight, here comes a frame house down on the west side. She was a 2 story and tilted over considerable. We paddled out and got aboard, clumb in at upstairs window, but it was too dark to see yet, so we made the canoe fast and set in her to wait for daylight. The light began to come before we got to the foot of the island. Then we looked at the window. We could make out a bed and table and 2 old chairs, and lots of things around on the floor, and there was clothes hanging against the wall. There was something laying on the floor in the far corner that looked like a man, and Jim says, "Hello, you," but it didn't budge. So I hollered again, and then Jim says, "The man ain't asleep, he's dead. You hold still, I'll go see." He went and bent down and looked and says, "It's a dead man. Yes, indeedy, naked too. He's been shot in the back. I reckon he's been dead 2 or 3 days. Come in, Huck." But don't look at his face, it's too ghastly. I didn't look at him at all. Jim throwed some old rags over him, but he needn't done it. I didn't want to see him. There was heaps of old greasy cards scattered around over the floor, and old whiskey bottles and a couple of masks made out of black cloth, and all over the walls was the ignorant, racist kind of words and pictures made with charcoal. There was two old dirty calico dresses and a sunbonnet, and some women's underclothes hanging against the wall, and some men's clothing too. We put a lot into the cleaning. It might come good. There was a boy's old speckled straw hat on the floor. I took that too, and there was a bottle that had milk in it, and it had a rag stopper for a baby to suck. We would we would have took the bottle, but it was broke. There was a seedy old chest and an old hair trunk with the hinges broke. They stood open, but there weren't nothing left in them that was any account. There was the way things were scattered about, we reckoned the people left in a hurry, and weren't fixed as to carry off most of their stuff. We got old we got an old tin lantern and a butcher knife without any handle, and a brand new Barlow knife worth 2 bits in any store, and a lot of tallow candles, and a tin candlestick, and a cord, and a tin cup, and a ratty old bed-quilt off the bed, and a reticule with needles and pins, and beeswax, and buttons and thread, and all such truck in it, and a hatchet and some nails, and a fish line as thick as my little finger with some monstrous hooks on it, and a roll of buckskin, and a leather dog collar, and a horseshoe, and some vials of medicine that didn't have no label on them. And just as we was leaving, I found a tolerable good currycomb, and Jim he found a ratty old fiddle bow and a wooden leg. The traps was broke off of it, but bearing that, it was a good enough leg, though it was too long for me and not long enough for Jim, and we couldn't find the other one, though we hunted all around. And so, take it all around, we made a good haul. When he was ready to shove off, he was we was a quarter of a mile below the island, and it was pretty broad day. So I made Jim lay down in the canoe and cover up with a kilt, because if he sat up people would tell he was a man a good ways off. I paddled over to the Illinois shore and drifted down most half a mile doing it. I crept up a dead water under the bank and hadn't no accidents and didn't see nobody. We got home all safe. Chapter 10. After breakfast, I wanted to talk about the dead man and guess out how he had come to be killed, but Jim didn't want to. He said it would fetch bad luck, and besides, he said, he might come and haunt us. He said a man that weren't very likely to go a haunting around that one that was planted and comfortable. That sounded pretty reasonable, so I didn't say no more, but I couldn't keep from studying over it and wishing I knowed who'd shot the man, and what they'd done it for. We rummaged the clothes we'd got and found $8 in silver sewed up in the lining of an old blanket overcoat. Jim said he reckoned that people in that house stole the coat, because they knowed the money was there, they wouldn't a left it. I said I reckoned they killed him too, but Jim didn't want to talk about that. I says, now you think it's bad luck, but what did you say when I fetched in the snake skin that I found on top of the ridge day before yesterday? You said it was worst bad luck in the world to touch a snake skin with my hands. Well, here's your bad luck. We've raked in all this truck and $8 besides. I wish I could have some bad luck like this every day, Jim. Never you mind, honey, never you mind. Don't you get too pert. It's a comin', mind I tell you, it's a comin'. It did come too. It was a Tuesday that we had that talk. Well, after dinner Friday, we was laying around in the grass in the upper end of the ridge and got out of tobacco. I went to the cavern and to get some and found a rattlesnake in there. I killed him and curled him up on the foot of Jim's blanket. Ever so natural, thinking there'd be some fun when Jim found him there. Well, by night I forgot all about the snake, and when Jim flung himself down on the blanket where I struck a light, the snake's mate was there and bit him. He jumped up yelling, and the first thing the light showed was the vermin curled up and ready for another spring. I laid him out in a second with a stick, and Jim grabbed Pop's whiskey jug and began to pour it down. He was barefooted, and the snake bit him right on the heel. That all comes to my being such a fool as to not remember that whenever you leave a dead snake, its mate always comes there and curls around it. Jim told me to chop off the snake's head and throw it away, and then skin the body and roast a piece of it. I done it, and he eat it and said it would help cure him. He made me take off the rattles and tie them around his wrists too. He said that that would help. Then I slid out quiet and throwed the snakes clear away amongst the bushes, for I weren't going to let Jim find out it was all my fault, not if I could help it. Jim sucked and sucked at the jug, and now and then he got out his head and pitched around and yelled, but every time he came to himself, he went to sucking at the jug again. His foot swelled up pretty big. So did his leg. But by and by the drunk begun to come, and so I judged he was all right. But I'd rather been bit with a snake than Pop's whiskey. Jim was laid up for 4 days and nights. Then the swelling was all gone and he was around again. I made up my mind I wouldn't ever take a hold of a snake's skin again with my hands. Now that I see what had come of it. Jim said he reckoned I would believe him next time, and he said that handling a snake skin was such an awful bad luck that maybe we hadn't got to the end of it yet. He said he'd rather see the new moon over his left shoulder as much as 1,000 times than take up a snake skin with his hand. Well, I was getting to feel that way myself, though I always reckoned that looking at the new moon over your left shoulder is one of the carelessest and foolish things a body could do. Old Hank Bunker done it once, and bragged about it, and in less than 2 years he got drunk and fell off of a shot tower and spread himself out so that he was just a kind of a layer, as you may say, and they slid him edgeways between two barn doors off a coffin and buried him so they say, but I didn't see it. Pop told me. But anyway, it all came off looking at the moon that way, like a fool. Well, the days went along and the river went down between its banks again, and about the first thing we done was to bait one of the big hooks with a skinned rabbit and set it and catch a catfish that was as big as a man, being 6 foot 2 inches long and weighed over 200 pounds. We wouldn't handle him, of course. He would have flung us into Illinois. We just sat there and watched him rip and tear around till he drowned. We found a brass button in his stomach and a round ball and lots of rubbish. We split the ball open with a hatchet and there was a spool in it. Jim said he'd had it there a long time, to coat it over so and make a ball of it. It was a big a fish as I ever catched in the Mississippi, I reckon. Jim said he hadn't ever seen a bigger one. He would have been worth a good deal over the village. They paddle out such a fish as that by the pound in the market house there. Everybody buys some of him. His meat as white as snow and makes a good fry. Next morning I said it was getting slow and dull, and I wanted to get stirring up some way. I said I reckoned I would slip over the river and find out what was going on. Jim liked that notion, but he said I must go in the dark and look sharp. Then he studied it over and said, couldn't I put some of them old things and dress up like a girl? That was a good notion too. So we shortened up one of the calico gowns and I turned up my trouser legs to my knees and got into it. Jim hitched it behind with the hooks and it was a fair fit. I put on the sunbonnet and tied it under my chin, and then for a body to look in and see my face was like a looking down a joint of stovepipe. Jim said nobody would know me, even in the daytime. Hardly. I practiced around all day to get the hang of things, and by I could do pretty well in them. Only Jim said I couldn't dress like a girl, and he said I should pull them down to get my breech pockets. I took note and bear. I started up the Illinois shore in the canoe just after dark. I started across the town from a little below the ferry landing, and the drift on the current fetched me in at the bottom of the town. I tied up and started along the bank. There was a light burning and a little shanty that hadn't been lived in for a long time, and I wondered who had took up quarters there. I slipped up and peeped in at the window. There was a woman about 40 years old in there knitting by a candle that was on a pine table. I didn't know her face. She was a stranger, for you couldn't start a face in that town by day. I was getting afraid I had come. People might know my voice and find me out. But if this woman had been in such a little 2 days, she could tell me all I wanted to know. So I knocked at the door and made up my mind I wouldn't forget I was a girl. Thank you that we could sit together. I appreciate you. I don't know how, I don't know when, but it's going to be okay. And if it's not, at least you're not alone anymore. And for that, I'm proud of you. If you need me again, I'll be back soon. Good night.